What's going on, dividend chasers? So Dividend Bloodhound here, and welcome to another investing episode. In today's episode we're asking a super important question as to what does the Fscs, the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, actually do to protect your money and your investments? What will they actually cover should the worst happen to your investments? Now, this is an unlikely event, but it does happen, hence why the scheme exists. So it's probably important for us investors to know what exactly will happen should the worst happen to your broker or your bank, whoever you invest with. That being said, I hope this video does bring you some value today, and if that is the case, then do please consider hitting the like button and even subscribing to my channel and hitting the notification bell as well to get notified when I release brand new content. I'll catch you on the other side of the intro. See you there. Hey again guys, welcome into the video. So in a recent episode I actually asked the question, is Freetrade safe? And some of the information I put forward in that was related to the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, the Fscs, and how it can protect some of your investments with Freetrade. I had some questions come back through from that from viewers of the video saying and asking, what does the Fscs actually cover? And how do they actually pay out when the worst happens to your investments? So today, with thanks to Sean Towers, who contacted me on Facebook and actually helped me garner some of this information, I'm hopefully going to explain to you what it actually does and how you can protect your investments through using this scheme and using multiple brokers. As many of you no doubt know, the Fscs will cover £85,000 worth of cash in your bank account. Now this applies to whatever bank account you have here in the UK, and it is obliged to pay that out should the worst happen to your bank. So if HSBC went bust, for example, £85,000 of your money would be protected. Any more than that, not so lucky, unfortunately. But as you well know, with investments, it gets slightly more complicated because you actually own paper shares in a company, and it all gets a little bit more complex with how assets held are broken down into different entities. And that is done in 3 different ways, which I'm hopefully going to explain to you in this video. So the 3 subjects that I'm going to cover are cash investments, broker fraud, and fund provider fraud. So all of these, the Fscs in some way may be able to protect you and give you up to £85,000 of your money back. It's important to say that this information following on cash is what is termed as cash held in your brokerage account, not your investments or the value of your investments, the cash that you might be holding there to take advantage of a dip in the market. So £5,000 for example, waiting in cash, ready to buy in next time there's a market crash. So that money will be covered and it'll sit with your brokerage and will be covered by the Fscs. Now the brokerage, to actually help with this, will actually spread that money out, usually between different banks, not just holding it in one bank. Therefore, as an example, if you had and you were lucky enough to have £100,000 with Trading 212, they should split that out amongst multiple entities. In this example, I'm just going to say Bank A and Bank B. That cash, if it was just £100,000 in cash, could be held from Trading 212 to 2 different banks, banks A and B. Now if Trading 212 were to go bust and that £50,000 was split between Bank A and Bank B, that £100,000, sorry, that was split £50,000 Bank A and £50,000 Bank B, then both of those monies are actually covered by the Fscs because it's 2 separate entities, and the Fscs sees them as 2 different coverable amounts. So potentially you are covered up to £170,000 across those 2 entities, and then it obviously gets better as the amount of entities multiply. So if your broker spreads them across 4 banks, 5 banks, 6 banks, the cash, and it's important to say, just the cash is protected. Hopefully you guys understood that. And now we're going to ramp it up just a little bit more and make it slightly more complex. So if you had that same £100,000, but you split it £50,000 with Trading 212 and £50,000 with Hargreaves and Lansdowne, for example, but then they both used the same entity to store that £100,000 total, 50,000 from each, and they used this, by unfortunate nature, they used the same bank to store both of it, then you would only be covered for £85,000 of that cash investment. So you would potentially lose £15,000 should the worst happen. This is the reason why the brokers such as Trading 212, Freetrade, and then even more established brokers like Hargreaves and Lansdowne, they use multiple different banks to hold on to your assets. So they almost diversify your cash amongst different banks, so it's actually protected on your behalf. Now, I didn't know this until Sean Towers actually told me off Facebook, and I did some of my own digging as well. So this is actually quite a good thing and quite reassuring to know about your investments. Just the cash side, I have to admit, but that money is very, very safe, to be fair, especially if it is diversified across multiple different banks. That should all be covered by the Fscs. Rounding on nicely from that then is the actual shares that you own in your brokerage. They are actually yours. So if they should be ring fenced. So if the broker, your broker, so for example Freetrade or Trading 212 was to go bust, they actually remain yours. The broker cannot sell them to settle their debt. It's just not part of the business. As long as they haven't committed fraud and have actually bought the shares on your behalf, they are held in your account. They're yours. They cannot be touched. The only problem is if they were to go bust, is you've got to then administrate those shares, transferring over to a new broker, which shouldn't be hard. The Fscs isn't going to cover the value of those shares because they are actually yours. And it's also worth mentioning that the Fscs does not cover bad investments. So if you decided to lump £85,000 in a terrible investment decision in one company and it halved in value, or the company went bust overnight or over 3 months or whatever, then they are not going to pay out for that, and that is just your poor investing decision. So don't think that the compensation scheme will cover anything like that, because it most certainly will not. That moves us on nicely to the next segment of this video, which is broker fraud. Now, the Financial Services Compensation Scheme will compensate you for this, again up to £85,000 in cash. So if you deposited that into your bank account and then essentially into your brokerage account, and essentially the brokerage never did anything with them, they just withdrew the money and disappeared, then the Fscs would give you that £85,000 back. However, if you decided to give them even more money than that, if you gave them £100,000 and they walked with it, then you would only get £85,000 back. And that is why it's really important to be super confident. If you're investing large sums of money, you need to be extremely confident in the brokerage that you use. Broker fraud is pretty simple there, really. There's not much to add to that one. It is literally just, if they steal your cash, you are definitely covered. If they bought you the shares and then went bust, then them shares are yours as long as they actually exist and they are yours. So if there's some sort of in the middle ground where they have bought or they haven't, then that would have to be cleared up, and you'd have to obviously liaise with the Financial Services Compensation Scheme to sort out whether they are held in cash or whether they are actual shares, and sort that legality route out there. Obviously that would be very complicated, but that's the guidance you're given on that one on the website. The third and final section is fund provider fraud. And again, it gets slightly complicated here and slightly long-winded. Do please try and keep up and understand the way that I'm saying it. I hope that I explain it in the best way possible. And if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to ask in the comments below, because I know this will get a little bit complex and might be a little bit more difficult to understand, but I will do my very best. So talking about fund providers then, I'm going to talk about Vanguard here. Now if you had £100,000 invested with Vanguard and they committed fraud with it and walked off with all that money, not that they're going to, Vanguard are a very, disclaimer, Vanguard are a very, very reputable investment provider, an ETF provider, so that is, I'm not saying that at all, it is just an example. But if they did commit fraud and they walked with your £100,000 worth of investment, you would only get £85,000 back through the Fscs. So that is again worth bearing in mind when you invest in these ETFs and you invest with brokerages, etc. And this again works the same across brokerages. So going back to the same example, if you had £50,000 with Trading 212 and £50,000 with Hargreaves and Lansdown, and you put both of that into the same Vanguard ETF and Vanguard committed fraud with it, again only £85,000 of that investment would be covered, because it's the same institution that's essentially committed fraud. So you're only going to get £85,000 back out of the 100,000, even though you invested in the same fund through two different brokerages and providers. Moreover, if you had the same £50,000 again in the two different brokerages, but you invested one in Vanguard and the other in iShares, then that would be covered by the obviously by the Fscs. This is because those entities are completely separate and you are below the £85,000 threshold. Therefore, it is actually possible, as long as you diversify along your different institutions and use different brokerages, you could potentially cover more than your £85,000. A lot of people think that it is just a flat £85,000 is covered in your investments and that's it, can't get no more. However, this sort of research has shown that if you use different brokerages and those brokerages use different institutions to invest, then you can absolutely protect more of your investment than just £85,000. You could really spread it out. Obviously you don't want to spread yourself too thin, and really when you're investing you want to be super confident in the brokerages and the investments that you take on to make sure that they're not fraudulent. But sometimes that isn't always possible and people have fell for scams and stuff in the past. So it's important to know that you might be able to get more than £85,000 covered by the Fscs. To wrap up then, you would be massively unlucky to get a brokerage that decides to commit fraud, or a fund provider, especially the major ones such as Vanguard and your iShares and your major brokerages like Hargreaves and Lansdown, Trading 212, Freetrade. You would be massively unlucky to have them commit fraud or anything like that. But it is reassuring to know that across, as long as it's diversified across different institutions and different brokerages, then you can actually have more. If you're fortunate enough to have more than £85,000, you can actually get more than that covered. And as an investor, you know that your cash is essentially safe all the way up until it actually gets to buy shares. And then when the cash is used to buy shares, those shares are safe, they are yours, they can't be taken off you by a dodgy brokerage or whatever. They've got your name on them essentially, they're just held on your behalf, and should a brokerage go bust or whatever, then that account can just easily be transferred to another provider, and that is and should give investors quite a warm fuzzy feeling that that is quite safe. You can't be protected from terrible investment decisions, but you can be protected from criminals or dodgy brokerages, etc., or just unfortunate circumstance. I do hope you've enjoyed this video today. I hope it has brought you some value. If you can show it a little bit of appreciation, it has taken a lot of research to look into this, do please hit the like button, that would be absolutely fantastic. And if you're new and you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, it'd be awesome, absolutely awesome if you could do that as well. Hopefully I'll see you in another investing episode. Catch you later, bye bye.